Hello and welcome to another edition of Napa Institute Conversations. I'm Kristin Meyer, and today we are joined by a very special guest, Dr. Carrie Gress, author, mother, wife. And today she's going to be talking about one of her latest books, The Anti-Mary Exposed, Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity. She's also the author of several books, especially on Our Lady, The Marian Option, Theology of Home, and her newest book, Theology of Home 2. Carrie, welcome.
Thank you. It's so great to be here today.
So today we're going to be talking about the Anti-Mary Exposed, and we are in a situation, while this book was published in 2019, 2 years ago, it's been in the news again. You are one of the latest victims of cancel culture.
You've been canceled.
So you've been canceled,
Yeah.
but I would like to point out that it is Women's History Month, and the theme of Women's History Month of last year was "They shall not be silenced." So you will not be silenced.
Right. That's so great.
Tell us a little bit about what happened with your book.
Well, this book, a gift shop actually tried to sell it on Facebook Marketplace, and they were told it didn't comply with Facebook's policies and community standards and whatever. And initially I thought, okay, well maybe it's kind of a fluke. And then it turns out they tried to post the same book on Instagram. So I was like, okay, well, they're owned by the same people. There must be, maybe this is a fluke, but it's systemic at least at this point. So anyway, they ended up, what happened there, of course, is people found out that it looked like it was really being banned. And so people just bought a ton of copies. And it just shot up on Amazon. It was up at like 242, and it was #1 on women's theory and feminist books, actually, which is pretty funny because the books underneath it were things like "I Hate Men" and all of these books that were just such a contrast to this book. But what then happened was Amazon actually stopped selling it. They ran out of stock, but they stopped selling like future products. You know how when you buy something and it's not going to ship for like a month, it'll say this will ship, and here are the buttons to buy it. Well, that was all taken down. You could only buy it from a third-party seller. So for like a week that happened, and my publisher was working with them trying to get it put back up. And anyway, it was just one of those things where I was like, okay, this book is 2 years old. Yeah. It's right after the inauguration, and suddenly big tech is making it very difficult for this book to be sold. Could be fluke. We don't have a lot of, there's no evidence that was really targeted, but when you've got 3 different platforms, it looks pretty clear that something's going on. So you can now buy it back at Amazon. I think that they were just trying to keep it from getting like a bestsellers list somewhere or something. So, so that's what happened. Was it never made a bestsellers list, but it certainly sold out, and I think has definitely renewed people's interest in the book. And people are looking at it and reading it, and we're working on a Spanish edition. So it's been really heartening to see that something good can come from this.
And what is it in the book that's so controversial that would make them want to ban something?
Right. Well, and this was the fun part because I ended up doing actually a lot of media in I did Russian TV, I did Polish radio or Polish newspaper, Hungarian radio. So it was interesting to see that it was these countries where they had lived under censorship for so long, to see that they were really interested in the story and ran with it. But in the book, I basically outline, the fact that women have been silenced for 50 years, that we've got this narrative that started really in the 60s, and it's still with us today. In fact, all you have to do is blame the patriarchy for something, and that's a good enough answer. Even last week, Madonna blamed the patriarchy for, I don't know if it was her lack of success or something on Twitter. She's only worth $850 million, and she was blaming the patriarchy. Death to the patriarchy. So
interesting.
So it's fascinating and sad at the same time that we have this narrative that's been running on for 50 years. It hasn't changed. It's the same arguments today that mothers and grandmothers were making before. But part of that narrative is really to silence those of us that disagree with it, and to paint us as doormats and not intellectually savvy and all of that. So that's really the contrast that I think that they've been successful at doing. And so that's what I'm really pushing back against, is this idea that if we don't buy into their narrative, that something's wrong with us. And in fact,
Right.
you know, we can see that that narrative has led to a lot of really unhappy women too.
There was a Napa Institute conversation that Fran Meyer did with Rod Dreher about 2 months ago, and he had mentioned in his latest book that he met with a woman, a grandmother from Czechoslovakia, and she was seeing all of the same issues
Same
happening
pattern. Yeah.
in America that she dealt with the communists. And he thought maybe she was just being a little dramatic, and so he asked other people who suffered under communism, and they said, absolutely, we're
Same thing.
seeing the same patterns happening in our culture.
Yeah.
Now, interesting, you mentioned Russia, that you did Russian
I
TV.
did, yep.
Speak a little bit about Fatima and how that plays into the feminist movement.
Well, I talk about this in the book. Our Lady of Fatima, of course, said that if the world didn't convert, if Russia wasn't converted, that the lies of Russia would be spread worldwide. And the lie of Russia, of course, is Marxism.
Sure. And this
But I
was in
think
1917.
1917,
right?
a
So
very, very long time
over
ago.
100 years ago.
Yeah. So her point in Russia was what? Well, I think most people, when they think of Marxism, they think of it economically. That, you know, it's the opposite of capitalism. But I think that what she meant, and I think what we're seeing, is really this distortion of human nature, because that's what the Soviets did. They came in and they tried to change women into the, you know, the great, you know, the perfect worker.
Yeah.
And they sent their children away. They made abortion available to anybody who want one. You know, you couldn't own any land, but you could have an abortion any day of the week.
Yeah.
So I think that that's where it really started, was this idea that human nature can in fact be changed and is malleable. So then if you look at what's happened since the 60s and 70s, I mean, that's really the effort, is to really deny the feminine, make women think that they need to be like men, but also try to convince men that they need to be like women. And even Gloria Steinem said, she wrote this book shortly after she turned 80, and she said that was the whole goal of her life and the movement, was to just make this genderlessness, you know, ubiquitous, to make everybody kind of genderless. And she's
here
very
we are.
proud. Yeah, and so you can see it's really the, you know, the LGBT movement is just an extension of all of this, because if you didn't have women denying their femininity and what it means to be a woman, you certainly wouldn't have, you know, gone off the cliff into just all this confusion and gender dysphoria and whatnot that we're dealing with today. And even BLM has a lot to do with it, because of course there's some deep, deep Marxist roots there. It was started by 3 lesbian women. So it's all part and parcel of this desire to change human nature, to destroy the family, and to just promote this genderlessness. So it's very sad.
So let's back up a little bit and define what an anti-Marian woman is.
Right. Well,
what are some of her qualities?
Right. Well, the first thing is the anti-Mary is, it's a play on the idea of an antichrist. So it's not a single person, the way that it's spoken of, like an antichrist in Revelation. St. John talks about, in one of his letters, talks about this idea of an antichrist spirit that's in the world. And that's kind of how I describe it in the book, that it's a spirit it's taken over the heart of women. So it's not an individual per se. But the woman that is the anti-Mary, and she's animated by kind of all the things that are opposed to Our Lady. You know, that there's especially life. The life issue, I think, is a big piece of it. But Our Lady was humble. She was, you know, willing to serve others. And I think that in the culture today, it's so easy to see this layer of narcissism and this desire to be served, this desire to have it all, to sort of take it all in and want everything, but not recognize that there's an element of service and self-gift.
Right.
So yeah, that's really, I think, the
I'm very much struck by the images that we see, especially a few years ago when the Women's March came about, and the difference between, the contrast between the pro-life march of these really wonderful, young, vibrant,
right, healthy
people who, young,
yeah,
people who are fighting for the rights of others, right? And for innocent human beings, and for the right to life. And then you contrast that a day later with women who are wearing grossly inappropriate hats, who are saying very vulgar things, who are making threats to people, and it's just not a virtuous sense that you get from that. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, and what that stems from.
No, I think that I like the way that you put those together. In fact, that's one of the reasons this is actually a picture from the Women's March on the cover of the book, them wearing those pink hats.
Oh, it's interesting. It looks like flowers.
Yeah, no, that was the idea, was
Yeah.
just this contrast. It looks like flowers, but it's actually an actual picture from the march of all those pink hats. So, yeah, I think that there's definitely a contrast, and you can just see so clearly this brokenness. In fact, I had a good friend of mine, shortly after the book came out, he said, you know, once you see the anti-Mary, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
It's really hard to unsee it because it just feels like it's kind of evident and everywhere. So yeah, I think that those two marches kind of exhibit it beautifully in terms of just the contrast of where it comes from.
The idea of feminism, I think, started out with a good root, right, in sort of a proper equality in the first wave feminism. But then the second wave feminism comes about in the 60s. So talk a little bit about who the founders were, sort of their backgrounds, their relationships with their mothers. You go into that. The idea of lesbianism that came out of that.
Yeah. Well, the first wave I haven't done research on deeply. I've actually started looking into it. There's a book that's just come out from Oxford University Press on this topic. It actually talks about how the first wave was even satanic.
Sure.
Had those roots in it. So, but I didn't focus on that. There was so much in the second wave, and I think that's really where it was like the match was thrown and everything sort of blew up into this fire that we're living with now. But yeah, I interviewed Mallory Millett, whose sister Kate Millett. Kate's passed away now, but Kate was very much an instrumental figure in terms of just promoting the movement and giving it some sort of intellectual credence and credibility. And it's her book, Sexual Politics, that actually has been used for all of the women's studies programs that we have in our universities and things like that, sort of the backbone of it. And she was really instrumental in helping those get established. But she, she's on the cover of Time magazine, and she's very much an icon of this. And since her death, Mallory has been talking about just how troubled and awful Kate was. I mean, she was schizophrenic, and she's very much a lesbian, and just struggled and suffered with so many various issues in her life. But she was also a Marxist. There was very much an occult element involved. Mallory describes this dinner that she showed up to on Halloween night with these 12 women sitting naked around a table with bowls and utensils and a boa constrictor.
Interesting.
And Mallory was like, okay, it's time to leave, and just, got out of there. So she doesn't even know what happened. But, 12 is not an accidental number.
Absolutely.
I mean, Kate was very much a Catholic and understood this symbolism of 12 women. And I think you can see even from that group, and you can see all these other groups that were kind of coming up at that time, just so much brokenness, and yet they were they had so much attention. There was someone like Gloria Steinem, who was gorgeous and who was articulate, and women just followed them and just thought this is something there's got to be something good about this. And
it's glamorous.
Yeah. They made it very fashionable, and it was, of course, TV was really up and coming at that point too. So it was all of those things working together. But you can kind of see how it was these lost women. And Phyllis Chesler is one of these grandmothers of the movement. She talks about them being these lost girls, that they finally found themselves, because all of them had issues with their moms, especially Betty Friedan. I mean, it was just amazing to see the background and the baggage that these women had. Right. And so they took that baggage, and they're breaking others. Broken people break other people. And so rather than recognizing, like, okay, maybe we need actually, therapy and faith and God. Right. They took it the other direction and really ran with it and just absorbed all of the attention. And that's what made the movement, I think, so explosive. And we can see that very much, the exact same pattern with the LGBT movement. Right. LGBT movement right now. Right. Is so much attention. You would think that every other person is part of that culture, and yet the general number is 2%. I think Gallup just came out with a new poll, and among millennials, it's up higher. It's at 16%. Well, why is that? Because there's so much attention that they're getting. So
it's an interesting, it seems to be rooted in Eve, right? And the serpent tempting her, saying, you can be like God, right? Yeah. And so these women who are searching for something that, St. Augustine obviously says, our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. But when you're searching for something outside of God, they have found it in their community. Dear friends of the Napa Institute, Robbie George and Pastor Eugene Rivers, who's a dear personal friend of John and I's, along with his wife Jackie from the Seymour Institute at Harvard, had this really beautiful quote the other day, and Jean says to Rabbi, "Rabbi, when the devil comes to try to take my soul, to lead me away from Christ and into the mire of sin, do you think he's going to come dressed up in a KKK robe and hood? Do you think he's going to be wearing a Nazi SS uniform? Do you think he's going to be preaching racism and bigotry? No, the devil is evil, but he's the opposite of stupid. When he comes to try to take my soul, he's going to make sure to look like me and sound like me. He's going to be saying things I want to hear. He's too smart to present himself in a way that's going to repel me. He's going to present himself in a way that's going to attract me. He's my worst enemy, worse than any Klansman or Nazi, but he's going to try to convince me he's my best friend. He does that to everyone, no matter whether you're black or white, male or female, young or old. That's why he's so dangerous and why he's so often successful." Yeah. Now that
really
takes
powerful.
me into the idea of where much of these feminism, much of where the feminism came from. And you talk a lot about the Cosmo Girl and Helen Gurley Brown.
Yeah, well, I mean, first, I think you're right on with Betty Friedan is actually the first one that talked about this ache with no name.
Sure. And speak a little bit about that. What is the ache with no name?
Yeah,
What is she
I mean,
referring to?
I think she's referring to that ache that we all have, you know, the desire for God. And but she didn't realize that's what she was talking about. She just thought it was because women were at home.
Right.
And that's kind of how she articulated it.
The housewives weren't fulfilled.
Right.
The motherhood and being a wife wasn't fulfilling.
Exactly. And so that's the ache. And of course, now that women aren't at home, the ache is still there because it's an ache for God. So it's sad that she didn't know her tradition as a Jewish woman well enough to really recognize, like, okay, this is what's going on. Instead, she put it in her books, and this is what really spoke to so many women who didn't also know their own traditions as Jewish women or Catholics or even just educated women. Like this is what historically we know to be the case. So it's interesting because you've got someone like Betty Friedan, who was not an intellectual. She was also not a lesbian, and actually there was a lot of infighting about that because she didn't want that part to be part of the movement. Then you've got Kate Millett, who was very much an intellectual, and then you've got Helen Gurley Brown, who's the Cosmo girl, and actually she modeled her whole Cosmo magazine after Playboy. She got the same writers, all of that was just modeled after Playboy, down to the smallest detail. So then it begs the question, like, how do all these women actually fit together and be united under one banner? And I think that was a real struggle for a long time, but what actually did it was abortion. And that's the glue that has held them together, was this belief that abortion is this inviolable right, and it's very important, and women can't be happy without it. And of course, that's the real fundamental lie. I mean, there's several lies in feminism. One of them, of course, is that women, in order to be equal, have to be like men, and men are our enemies. But the second one is more tragic, and we live this every day with the abortion numbers, and that's that our children are an enemy. That they're an obstacle to our happiness instead of an avenue or conduit to our happiness. So that's really the tragedy, is that you have all of these women of these various broken pieces that all come together and are glued together. So you have women who are much more attracted to the Cosmo girl that are reading Helen Gurley Brown, or you have other women who are more like Kate Millett, that they're more intellectual. Like, there's something for everybody in it, because they've been able to hitch their wagons together ideologically.
Right.
Under this abortion umbrella. So
Peter Kreeft I'm pretty sure it was Peter Kreeft had a great saying that I read in Plow magazine, which is a fantastic publication written by the Bruderhof community. And he said that abortion is the Antichrist sacrament. I'm paraphrasing here. Abortion is the Antichrist sacrament, using the same language. This is my body, right? And in abortion, it's, this is my body, I will not give it up for you. And of course, the opposite is true for us. And that always struck me. I read that a number of years ago, and it always struck me, because it really is the Antichrist. It really is anything other than Christ. And I think it's important to know, especially as Catholics, that there is a lot of demonic in our world. There is a spiritual battle that we're fighting. And sometimes we sound like we're crazy when we say that, but it's true, right? I mean, Our Lady of Fatima spoke to that over 100 years ago. Every Marian apparition kind of, extols her love and her peace, or has some sort of warning. And so I think it's important to, keep that as our source and to draw close to the sacraments. Now, you mentioned that the LGBT movement, and which was about 2%, and among teenagers, did you say, is up to 16%?
Millennials, yeah.
Millennials.
Yeah.
So, what has changed?
Yeah, I think it's just because it's fashionable.
Right.
It's everywhere. It's all over media, and this is one of the ways that we've been destroyed. Our culture has been destroyed. Is that these elite women, and certainly the men that follow them, control everything. They control politics. They control the fashion industry. They control magazines, books, Hollywood. All of that is just this kind of lockbox of ideas, and you can't really stray from that, or else you find yourself on the outside of it. And that's what they've been able to do with the LGBT movement, is that very same thing, is just promote these ideas. So it looks like the population is just riddled with people of this from that group, but in fact it's actually not. And I always think that's one of the fascinating things as Catholics. There's 35 million Catholic females in the United States. I mean, it's almost the population of Canada. I think Canada has 39 million people. We're at 35. And like 10% of the population. And yet we have zero voice, we have zero presence.
Right.
We're very invisible.
Right.
So I think that that's a great opportunity for us as Catholics to be able to find ways to use the things that they've used against us to reclaim women and to give them kind of an off-ramp from all these things that are making them miserable. Because that's the saddest part, is that we know, the anti-Mary is targeting virginity and it's targeting motherhood. Sue Ellen Browder, who wrote that book, Subverted, said when she wrote for Cosmo for 20 years, she said, I could write anything I wanted to. I could make up any kind of story I wanted about the Cosmo girl. She said, but I could not make her a virgin and I could not make her a mother. And that's the saddest part, is that those are the pieces that are actually fulfilling to women.
Right.
And we've entirely cut those avenues off for women so that they don't even begin to think about them as options for their happiness. And so that's I think the real issue is, again, this twisting of human nature and getting us away from that place where we can actually be happy and we can live our life with God and we can follow Our Lady in that route. I mean, she's a virgin mother.
Yeah.
So it's
and the only one throughout history.
Exactly.
Right. I think all of this sort of came to fruition in the Senate confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett for the Supreme Court.
Right.
And I was struck by, the questioning with Senator Feinstein, right, with the dogma lives loudly within you, and this was previous in 2017. What struck me, though, in her line of questioning is that she always began very complimentary of Amy Coney Barrett and her large family, and she makes the comment that she has admiration for her for raising 7 children, and that she struggled with raising 1, and it almost seemed as if it was this realization that feminism was a lie. And she immediately went into, but women need to have the right to control their own reproduction, right? But it seemed to me that as she has progressed in age and is now a grandmother, that maybe some of those realizations are coming about, and that here is this wonderful, successful woman who is now a Supreme Court justice, who has 7 children, is a loving mother and wife, and has it all. But she's not lauded as a feminist icon, right?
No, I think that's an incredible example of exactly how a woman like her is silenced, because she really does show women like, oh, maybe I didn't need to abort my children for success. And I think it's got to be a very painful and sad place to be somebody in that position. I know, someone like Barbara Walters has expressed the fact that she wished she had had more children. I think there's so many women out there in that position who have these regrets, because you get to a certain point where there's just no going back.
Right.
And I think that that's a real tragedy, and again another place for our compassion, because they've been so lied to. This isn't, a lot of this is not willing evil. It's being told that X is good when in fact we know X is actually bad. So it's really the weight of the culture has just impressed itself upon us so strongly that we can't really escape it unless we have faith and we have, other holy and faithful people in our lives to kind of direct us. But that's, one of the reasons why I think we just need strong women to reach out to neighbors, or to, this is how women historically have changed the culture. Is through
and
their
culture
husbands
flows
and children.
from women.
It does.
Right?
Yeah.
We
No,
are
I
the
think by
bearers
and
of
large.
culture. We have a huge responsibility
Yeah.
to promote culture among our children. And I
Right.
think there was a quote in the book about how women have the power to control culture sort of through the men, right? We have this
Yeah.
beautiful complementarity of men and women and our role of what God created us to be. And separate from each other, it's why God created Eve, right? Adam was alone when
Yeah.
he was by himself. He needed a complement. And so we need to have this beautiful complementarity.
Right.
Beyond even marriage, we see it in religious life. The priesthood is married to the church, right? And the religious life. There's a beautiful complementarity there. What is the hope for the future?
Yeah, I think,
Is there hope?
well, I think I think there's tremendous hope. I mean, there's always hope with our Lord and with Our Lady. We know that there's these cycles of civilization. I think that we have hope in the sense that people are sad and they're upset and they're in pain, and I think that those are opportunities for us to meet people in that space and say, you don't have to live your life this way. In fact, that's the big secret, is Catholic women have what every woman wants. You know, if you look at the statistics and the way it's broken down in terms of a faithful husband, they want children, they want all of these elements, that they want to be peaceful in the midst of chaos, all of this that we have been given through our faith. So I think that is compelling. I think we're also seeing sort of this bifurcation of just, there's no more being in the middle. Like the lukewarm is getting a harder and harder place to be.
Right.
So I think that is certainly hopeful in a way, because it just, you're not wondering anymore. It's just, you've got these two different directions to go in. So anyway, but no, I wrote the whole book, The Marian Option, about how Our Lady has interceded so many different times in different ways throughout culture and history, and that all we really need to do is form that relationship with her and keep it alive through the rosary and through coming to know her and coming to know her son and the sacraments and fasting. All of those things are really vital and important. But Our Lady builds culture. We've been tearing down culture. If you look around, this is what's happening, is culture is being torn down. But she builds it. Look at the greatest civilizations have been related to Our Lady. Look at Notre Dame Cathedral. All these incredible places all throughout Europe are named for and because of Our Lady.
The Battle of Lepanto.
The Battle of Lepanto.
Even in war,
Right.
she is protecting us.
She is. So I think that we have great hope in that, in terms of the divine intervention and what she can do through us when we make ourselves malleable and open to God's will.
You say in the book that if we're not an icon of Mary, we're an icon of Satan, right?
Yeah.
I think that's striking, in that it's a reminder every day that if we're not aligned with the beauty of the feminine genius and the beauty of what Our Lady offers us, then we're something other, and that other generally is not of God.
And the other is becoming more and more stark. In fact, I just wrote a piece for the Catholic Thing about this. Looking at renovated churches, churches that have been made ugly and how we're renovating them. But I also compared it to women and the beauty that women are supposed to have, and we're not seeing that beauty. And it's not just skin deep. The beauty is also is lacking on the interior part of the woman's soul. And I think that's why there is so much happiness and unhappiness and so much brokenness in the
Are
culture.
women happier from the feminist movement?
No. And that's another,
Here we are,
right?
decades later.
Right.
Are we happier?
Right. And I think that's one of the things that, as Catholic women, we sort of feel like, well, I have all these opportunities that I wouldn't have had without feminism, and so we kind of remain quiet about it and don't pay enough attention to it. And yet there's so many pieces that have just really destroyed women and are not making them happy. If you look at everything from suicides, drug abuse, depression, STDs, all of these things are not, you would expect sort of a correspondence with feminism and these happiness metrics, and in fact it's inverted, that women are becoming less happy, because they're destroying those relationships that are actually the ones that make us happy. Our relationship with husbands, fathers is another area where they're really breaking relationships, and then certainly with our children.
I think there was a study that the happiest people in the world are religious sisters, right? I mean, I think there's definitely something to that, and you don't need to look much farther than the Carmelites or the Dominicans and know that they always have a huge smile on their face and joy that exudes out of them.
Exactly.
What can women do, and speak a little bit about Theology of the Home, your newest project, what can we do to build up culture, to build up each other, to support each other,
Right.
and especially to make our homes the domestic church that we're called to create.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great and very big question that we could do a whole nother conversation
Sure.
about. But one of the things I noticed when I was researching this was that women weren't sitting around reading Marx. They weren't
Thank
looking
God.
at his book. Yeah, thank God. But
Yeah.
what they were reading had Marx in it, had Margaret Sanger's ideas in it, and they didn't realize it. It's all sort of disguised and sort of packaged, lovely, and
Sure.
looks beautiful and compelling. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the Theology of Home books, which they're highly illustrated. There's like over 100 pictures in both books, and was just to recognize that this is how they've destroyed us, was using a narrative packaged beautifully so that we ingest it over and over and over again every day. But as Catholics, we're not doing that. We sort of look at a book like this and people think, oh, it's just fluff.
Right.
When in fact, this is actually really important because we're telling our own story. We're saying, these are the values of Catholicism. Even we joke about how it's full of all these pictures that, are forbidden in the culture, like men who are manly and competent and, large families and pregnant women and all of that. So I think that we have to actually focus on, and I have a PhD in philosophy, so this has been a really long journey because I thought, I could just reason people back into the faith. But we're kind of in this post-rational age. Emotions and how people feel and are pulled into concepts through the visual is highly important. I mean, this is our media issue all day long.
Right.
So that's what we really have tried to do with Theology of Home, is to try to subtly, no hammer over the head or anything, but just present our message and the way Catholicism looks every day,
Right.
in a way that is compelling and beautiful and resonates with people. Who doesn't love talking about their home?
Right.
So that our first book was one that I could give to just about anybody, and they would find something that they loved about it. So I think that we have to find common ground, but in a way that we're not compromising ourselves or trying to give in to the culture, but that is presenting our story in a way that's compelling and beautiful, and people can find hope in that. So,
Right. And it's not specifically for Catholics either, right? I mean, this is something that all women are called to. We're innately created to be welcoming and loving and hospitable.
All of that.
And to be the caretakers of our home,
Right.
to welcome people into
Exactly.
it, right?
Right.
You speak a lot about spiritual motherhood, and today is Alice von Hildenbrand's 98th
Right.
birthday, right? And she was
Alice,
so lovely at this. And obviously her husband was a brilliant philosopher, but she was equally as brilliant, and does so with wit and grace and charm, and as only a woman could.
Yeah.
I think that's really beautiful. That's something that's not specific to Catholics. It's something that we can teach to our Protestant brothers and sisters, or to this increasingly secular society. I think that many people find it welcoming and loving and want to be part of someone's home and want to be welcomed to a party at someone's home, or just part of their community. I think that's something beautiful. What advice would you give to women as we close, especially to young girls?
I would say, the biggest thing is to really kind of get out of that cycle of trying to compete and be like men. And this is, it's hard advice because it's really hard to even just figure out what it means to be a woman anymore, because it's just not talked about. And I remember with my own daughter many years ago, she said, well, what is it that I can do that boys can't do? And I had like terrible answer. Like I just didn't have a good answer to give her. And I think that that's animated and motivated my own work. So looking into that, looking into what the feminine soul looks like and the things that drive us, like you said, spiritual motherhood is what every woman is tasked with. This desire to have compassion and help others. There's that great quote by St. Edith Stein of the woman's soul is fashioned to shelter others so that they may their souls may unfold.
And also, the world doesn't need what women have, but what women
they are. Yeah, exactly. And that's the capacity to love others. So I would say that's where you start, getting to know that. And even, that's the beauty of Our Lady, is she will teach us how it is that how it is to become the people that God intends us to be. Because she knows already who God made us to be. So that's the beauty of the rosary and all of that. But yeah, definitely just get out of that, what the culture is saying about women, and start focusing on really these desires of our hearts, which so many times we silence because we're like, this isn't acceptable socially and whatnot. So that I think
Be
that
not
would be-
afraid. Have the courage
you go.
to stand up. Thank you so much,
Exactly.
Carrie. This has
My
been
pleasure.
lovely.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for another Napa Institute conversation. Join us this summer, July 21st through 25th in beautiful Napa Valley. Our theme this year is All Things Made New. God bless.